In 2008, a company in Olathe, Kansas, controlled 36% of the global portable navigation device market. It shipped nearly 17 million dashboard GPS units in a single year and generated $3.5 billion in revenue. The product that built that empire, the compact satellite navigator suctioned to the windshield of every rental car and commuter sedan in America, would be functionally extinct within 5 years. A phone killed it. Not a better GPS, a phone. Every analyst on Wall Street wrote the obituary. And yet, as of this year, Garmin is worth $57 billion, nearly 3 times its peak valuation during the years it owned the dashboard. The company whose core product was erased became more valuable than it has ever been. That story starts in 1989, with 2 electrical engineers, 2 folding chairs, and a card table in a rented office in Lenexa, Kansas. You're watching Empire Circuit, where we take apart the companies that built the electronic world, down to the circuit board and the engineer who soldered it. If that's your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because the company that was supposed to die on every dashboard in America somehow came back worth more than it ever was, and how they pulled that off is pure engineering. Gary Burrell was born in 1937 and raised with a soldering iron practically in his hand. He studied electrical engineering at Wichita State University, earned a master's degree at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and spent his early career building navigation electronics at Lowrance Electronics and then King Radio Corporation in Olathe, Kansas. He was quiet, methodical, and possessed by a single idea. Satellite signals from the sky could tell a person exactly where they stood on the Earth. Min Kao came from the other side of the Pacific, born in 1949 in Jushan, a small town in Nantou County, Taiwan. Kao earned his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering at National Taiwan University, then crossed the ocean to the University of Tennessee, where he completed a master's degree in 1974 and a doctorate in 1977. He spent years designing satellite navigation algorithms, first for NASA, then for the defense contractor Magnavox, where he worked on military GPS systems before anyone imagined a civilian would ever need one. The 2 men met in the early 1980s at King Radio, which was later absorbed into Allied Signal. They worked side by side on aviation electronics, and they shared the same conviction that GPS, the constellation of 24 satellites the United States Air Force had built for Cold War navigation, could be miniaturized, commercialized, and sold to ordinary pilots, boaters, and drivers. Their employer disagreed. Allied Signal saw no future in civilian GPS. The margins were uncertain, the market unproven, and the Pentagon still deliberately scrambled the signal for anyone without a military receiver. Burrell and Kao argued their case. Allied Signal refused. So the 2 engineers quit. What they did next would start with a card table and end with every dashboard in America. In 1989, in a rented office in Lenexa, Kansas, they set up 2 folding chairs and a card table and called the company ProNav. They renamed it almost immediately. Garmin. Gary and Min. The name was the partnership itself. They funded the company with personal savings and maxed out credit cards, recruited a handful of trusted engineers, and set out to build the first product. Min Kao's connections in Taiwan would prove essential from the start. He established a manufacturing operation there that bypassed the enormous costs of outsourcing to third parties, giving Garmin a production advantage that would last decades. The first device was the GPS 100, a marine navigation unit the size of a small bread box, priced at $2,500. In 1990, they carried it to the International Marine Technology Exposition and set it up at their booth. 5,000 orders came in. For a startup running on folding chairs and personal debt, 5,000 orders was a different kind of life. But it was still a niche product, sold to boaters who could justify $2,500 for a box that told them their latitude and longitude. The company existed. The question was whether the world would ever care about GPS beyond the open water. Then a war answered the question for them. In January 1991, the United States went to war in the Persian Gulf, and the vast desert of Iraq and Kuwait offered American soldiers almost no landmarks to navigate by. The military's own GPS receivers were in short supply. Soldiers' families bought civilian GPS units off store shelves, Garmin's among them, and shipped them to the desert. Troops carried commercial navigation devices designed for fishing boats into a ground war across featureless sand. The GPS 100 was not built for combat. It went to combat anyway. Desert Storm proved to the world in 90 days what Garmin had been arguing in conference rooms for 2 years. GPS worked. It was accurate enough to trust your life to, and people needed it. The military would eventually become a direct customer, but the real prize was legitimacy. After the Gulf War, the question was no longer whether civilian GPS had a future. The question was who would build it fastest. Garmin built carefully. In 1994, they shipped the GPS 155, the first GPS navigation system certified for instrument flight rules in general aviation, meaning pilots could now fly approaches using satellite signals instead of ground-based radio beacons. Aviation was slow money, product by product, certification by certification, but it built a reputation for precision that no amount of marketing could buy. By 1995, revenue reached $102 million. By 1997, Garmin had sold its 1 millionth unit. The slow climb had taken 8 years. The product that would turn the climb into a rocket was 1 year away. In 1998, Garmin shipped the Street Pilot, and the car became the center of the company's future. The Street Pilot was a portable GPS navigator designed for the dashboard, measuring 3 inches by 7 inches by 2 inches, weighing just over a pound with its 6 AA batteries, and displaying a black and white moving map on a 240 by 160 pixel LED screen. It cost roughly $400. For that money, a driver got preloaded interstate and highway data for all of North America, a 12-channel GPS receiver, accurate to within 15 meters, and turn-by-turn route guidance calculated on the fly. A color model followed a year later. The folded road atlas, the gas station directions, the argument in the passenger seat about which exit to take. The Street Pilot made all of it obsolete. It would later be inducted into the Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame by IEE Spectrum, and for good reason. It was the device that taught America to trust a satellite instead of a map. That same year, Garmin released the GNS 430 for aviation, a combined GPS, navigation, and communication system with a color-moving map that Gary Burrell considered his finest product. It would become the backbone of general aviation cockpits for more than a decade. Then, on May 1, 2000, President Clinton ordered the military to turn off selective availability, the deliberate degradation of civilian GPS signals that the Pentagon had maintained since the system's inception. Overnight, the accuracy available to commercial receivers jumped from roughly 100 meters to 15. Consumer GPS, already useful, became precise. The market detonated. Nobody at Garmin in those years imagined that a telephone would ever need to know where it was. The car was the future, and the future was arriving faster than anyone had planned for. The global positioning system itself was a product of the Cold War. 24 satellites orbiting 12,000 miles above the Earth, each broadcasting a precisely timed signal that a receiver on the ground could triangulate into a position fix. The system was built by the Air Force, funded by the Pentagon, and opened grudgingly to civilian use. For the first decade of commercial GPS, accuracy was deliberately crippled to preserve military advantage. After selective availability ended, the consumer market did not grow. It erupted. The timing aligned with everything the electronics industry had to offer: cheap processors, sharper screens, falling memory prices, and the American commuter's hatred of being lost created a product category that barely existed in 1999 and was generating billions by 2006. Garmin rode every current. Revenue passed $200 million by 1999, and then the acceleration began. $1.03 billion in 2005, $1.77 billion in 2006, a 73% increase in a single year, $3.18 billion in 2007. In December 2000, Garmin had gone public on the NASDAQ at $14 a share. The stock climbed steadily, and the company was added to the S&P 500. Across the Atlantic, TomTom in the Netherlands competed fiercely. In the United States, Magellan fought on price. But Garmin had the product range, the aviation credibility, and the manufacturing cost advantage that Mincao's Taiwan operations provided. By 2008, the dashboard belonged to Kansas. The product that would destroy that dominance was announced in San Francisco in January 2007. It was not a GPS device. At its peak, Garmin was the American dashboard, 36% of the global portable navigation device market, 16.9 million units shipped in a single year, revenue of $3.49 billion, market capitalization exceeding $20 billion. In rental car lots from Newark to Los Angeles, the Garmin suction mount on the windshield was as universal as the rearview mirror. The Street Pilot had opened the door. What walked through it was the Nuvi. Launched in 2005, the Nuvi was everything the Street Pilot was not. It was slim, touchscreen, intuitive, and priced for the mass market. Where the Street Pilot had appealed to early adopters willing to spend $400 and load maps from a CD-ROM, the Nuvi spoke to everyone. It slid into a pocket. It announced directions aloud. It found the nearest gas station, the nearest restaurant, the nearest hotel. For a suburban family in 2006, a Nuvi under the Christmas tree cost under $200 and eliminated every wrong turn for the rest of their driving lives. The revenue trajectory said everything, from just over $1 billion to $3.5 billion in 4 years. Revenue more than tripled, and the Nuvi was the engine behind nearly all of it. The engineers who built those products are worth naming. Gary Burrell's fingerprints were on the aviation line, the GNS 430, and later, the G1000 integrated cockpit system that now operates in thousands of aircraft worldwide. Mincao built the manufacturing infrastructure that let Garmin produce at a scale and cost European competitors could not touch. Cliff Pemble, who had joined in 1989 as one of the company's very first engineers, ran day-to-day operations as president and chief operating officer from 2007. The company was built by engineers and run by engineers. In 2008, that looked like a permanent advantage. But while the Nuvi was printing money on every dashboard in America, a quieter bet was being placed inside the company. In 2003, Garmin had shipped the Forerunner 201, the world's first GPS running watch. It was bulky, heavy, and niche, sold to marathoners and triathletes who wanted to know their pace per mile without carrying a handheld unit. Almost nobody outside the running community noticed it. Then, in 2006, Garmin acquired a small Canadian company called Dynastream Innovations for $36 million. Dynastream made ANT+, a wireless protocol for connecting fitness sensors, heart rate monitors, and cadence meters to wearable devices. $36 million was loose change against $3.5 billion in revenue. The acquisition barely made the business pages. The company that owned the dashboard was quietly hedging on the wrist. Nobody paid attention because the car money was too loud. The Nuvi was still selling by the millions. The stock was still climbing. And then Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and held up a rectangle of glass. The iPhone arrived in June 2007, and it was not a GPS device. It did not have turn-by-turn navigation. It did not, in its first version, even carry a true GPS chip. But it had a touchscreen, an internet connection, and a map application that planted a simple, devastating idea. A phone could know where you are. In July 2008, Apple released the iPhone 3G with a built-in GPS receiver and Google Maps. The Nuvi cost $300 and did one thing. The iPhone cost $199 on contract and did everything. Then, in October 2009, Google made the killing blow. Free turn-by-turn navigation on every Android phone, free voice guidance, free on every smartphone in the world. The word free landed on Garmin's stock price like a hammer. Shares dropped 16% in a single trading day. The mechanism of destruction was not competition. It was category extinction. No one built a better dashboard GPS. The smartphone made the entire product form irrelevant. A device that did one thing was swallowed by a device that did 1,000 things, and navigation happened to be one of them, and it cost nothing. Revenue fell from $3.49 billion in 2008 to $2.95 billion in 2009 to $2.69 billion in 2010. The stock crashed nearly 80% from its peak. Market capitalization dropped from over $20 billion to under $4 billion. Garmin, in panic, partnered with Asus to build the Nuvaphone, a hybrid GPS smartphone. Underpowered, overpriced, and 2 years too late to market. It flopped. Every competitor in Garmin's rearview mirror was about to die. What nobody expected was that Garmin would not join them. TomTom pulled its consumer GPS navigators from the American market. Mio stopped releasing new devices entirely. Magellan faded into irrelevance. The portable navigation device industry, a market worth billions at its peak, collapsed into nothing. The companies that had defined the category either died or retreated to licensing mapping data to automakers. You can read what happened next, two ways. An honest history holds both readings at once. The generous reading is that Garmin had been building its escape route for years, that the Forerunner and the Dynastream acquisition were proof of strategic foresight planted long before the crisis. The harder reading is that those were side projects that happened to survive the shipwreck, and the real pivot was forced by desperation, not by planning. The truth is probably tangled somewhere between the two. On January 1, 2013, Cliff Pemble became CEO of Garmin. He had joined the company in 1989 as one of its first engineers. He had helped build the GPS 100. He had watched the Nuvi rise, dominate, and die. He was not a turnaround specialist or an MBA brought in to slash costs and sell assets. He was the engineer who had been there since the card table. And he made a decision that would define the company's second life. Let the dashboard go. Bet everything on the screens the smartphone cannot replace. The Phoenix, launched in 2012, became the instrument of that bet. A rugged outdoor smartwatch built with a metal case, multi-day battery life, and GPS tracking designed for hikers, runners, and mountaineers. John Hostler, product manager from the very first Phoenix, guided the line through a decade of relentless iteration. The Phoenix 3 in 2015 introduced exo antenna technology that received satellite signals through a metal front casing and a color memory in pixel display, visible in direct sunlight. The Phoenix 6 in 2019 added solar charging. The Phoenix did not attempt to compete with the Apple Watch. It measured lactate threshold, VO2 max, training load, and vertical oscillation. It was the instrument a serious athlete trusted, with years of training data, and a mountaineer trusted above the tree line. Garmin poured resources into engineering. Over 30% of the company's workforce became engineers and product developers. Revenue, which had bottomed at $2.63 billion in 2013, began to climb. $3.76 billion by 2019, $4.98 billion by 2021, $6.3 billion by 2024, $7.25 billion by 2025. The fitness and outdoor segments alone grew to 5 times their 2009 size. Aviation tripled. Marine tripled. The dashboard shrank to the smallest segment in the company, and nobody mourned it. The Nuvi is gone from the shelves, but Garmin is not merely alive. It is the largest thing it has ever been. Market capitalization in 2026 stands at $57 billion, against roughly $20 billion at the peak of the dashboard years. The stock trades above $290 from an IPO price of $14. 23,000 employees work in offices across 34 countries. Over 282 million products have shipped since the GPS 100 came off the line in 1990. Gary Burrell retired in 2002 and spent his later years in Spring Hill, Kansas, not far from the Olathe campus he had built from nothing. He died on June 12, 2019, at 81, from complications of Parkinson's disease. In September 2024, he and Min Kao were inducted together into the National Aviation Hall of Fame, recognized for the GNS 430 and G1000 cockpit systems that still fly in thousands of aircraft today. The Forerunner line has logged 18.7 billion running miles. In a survey of more than 50,000 marathon participants, over 70% of those wearing a watch chose a Garmin. The runners decided. The cyclists decided. The hikers, the sailors, the pilots decided. They strapped the device to their wrists, logged the miles, climbed the peaks, and cast the verdict with their bodies. That is a judgment no stock analyst can write, and no bankruptcy court can overturn. 2 folding chairs and a card table in Lenexa, Kansas. That is what Garmin was in 1989. 2 electrical engineers who quit their jobs because their employer could not see what they saw, that a constellation of Cold War satellites could guide a fishing boat, land an airplane, navigate a highway, and someday measure a runner's heartbeat at mile 20 of a marathon. They built the dashboard. The smartphone erased it, and then they built something bigger from what was left. The dashboard made Garmin a $3.5 billion company. Losing the dashboard made it a $50 billion one. If you owned a Nuvi, a Street Pilot, or a Forerunner, drop a comment below. Tell us the model and whether it still powers on. If you ran a marathon wearing a Garmin, tell us which watch and the time you posted. The people who mounted these devices on their dashboards and strapped them to their wrists know what these Kansas engineers built better than any analyst ever will. Subscribe if you want to keep building the archive with us. We have the story of another American tech empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.